Hello, everyone. I recently just saw something fun that popped up in my news feed. Bitcoin Depot. Many of you may know that name, many of you might not. If you'd been in a mall recently or even some convenience stores and you were looking for an ATM that specialized in Bitcoin, there was a big chance that they were the company behind that ATM. Basically, they're the largest operator of Bitcoin ATMs in all of North America. Well, I just found out that a few days ago they actually just filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. And for any of those who are keeping up in the space of Bitcoin ATMs, that's not exactly much of a surprise, but how we ended up getting here and the full collapse is quite interesting. So today I kind of wanted to discuss how we actually got here with at one point a 300 plus million market cap company that had 9,700 different kiosks and a massive network ended up, well, now filing for bankruptcy with no clear picture on how to move forward. So without further ado, let's jump into the video. Now, what's kind of fascinating is that this implosion happened in really a dramatically short time in terms of corporate life cycles. Basically, we can kind of track this back to as soon as 2025, where the FBI had a reported 369 million, somewhere in that ballpark, of potential fraud and scams that customers were actually turning in connected to Bitcoin ATMs in general. Now, at the same time, Bitcoin Depot, the largest provider of these Bitcoin ATMs, was facing some severe repercussions from different jurisdictions. We had some states like Indiana outright ban Bitcoin ATMs. We had some like Connecticut that dug into basically what Bitcoin Depot was supposed to be doing in terms of the cap of its transactions, and of course also a cap on in terms of what percent they could kind of take from the spread when people would actually utilize these bitcoins or Bitcoin ATMs. And then we additionally had some different jurisdictions like Maine and Massachusetts bring up that there had actually been fraudulent and scam activity on Bitcoin Depot's network, and they had done a lackluster job, to say the least, of stopping it. Now, one of the major areas of concern for Bitcoin Depot, outside, of course, of being banned from different states, is that a lot of these states actually ended up bringing lawsuits against Bitcoin Depot. Hence why they're filing for bankruptcy to try and figure out that. And of course, we saw a massive nosedive in revenue. Bitcoin Depot actually dropped about 50% of its revenue quarter over quarter and went from actually relatively profitable of a business model to an unprofitable business model. This is because a lot of those big name jurisdictions I just mentioned for Bitcoin Depot's business model fully capped some of the transaction amounts that could happen. Additionally, they stepped up the regulation immensely. Bitcoin Depot, it's not really a secret by any means. A lot of their transactions, let's just say, for instance, you wanted to buy Bitcoin on the ATM or sell Bitcoin on the ATM. In essence, in most of these jurisdictions, there's supposed to be a 15% maximum service fee, basically getting charged extra, that is where Bitcoin Depot was siphoning off its money from the transactions on its thing. But Bitcoin Depot, they didn't really comply with this 15% cap, and they weren't exactly expected to, because for a long time, a lot of jurisdictions didn't actually care to look into the Bitcoin ATM space whatsoever, and they were just like very loose and lax on the whole space in general. But now, with them cracking down on Bitcoin Depot and Bitcoin Depot's CEO even saying that at this point the landscape has changed so much, there's not a clear path forward for them. Not only are they strictly enforced on that 15% cap, they've now gotten a bunch of transactions they had through the Bitcoin Depot ATMs be scrutinized heavily for going over that 15% cap. Additionally, one of note that I find really interesting, Out of all the fraud that was kind of turned into the FBI, they have actually found some concrete evidence connecting specifically, and I find this interesting, Bitcoin depots in Circle Ks. They were able to track a bit over $1 million in malicious activity on these Bitcoin ATMs, some being scams, some being fraudulent, whatever the case may be. So, also in this relationship that I definitely think is worth noting, and we'll see how this plays out in the future. Both CNN and another organization kind of discussed this story, and they actually indicated that Circle K was well aware that this was happening with Bitcoin Depot ATMs at their location, and they still continued a relationship with Bitcoin Depot because Bitcoin Depot would pay a flat amount to Circle K to have their kiosks in their machines or in their stations. Now, one of the last ditch efforts Bitcoin Depot kind of made, because obviously most companies that are young and growing and in an explosive industry like crypto aren't just going to want to roll over and die. Naturally, they're going to try and come up with something. And they tried to introduce a new policy in February where they would start verifying every single user before any transactions happened on their Bitcoin ATMs. Now, this definitely it sounds really great on paper and it's definitely easy for them or easier for them to comply. But if we go to crypto as a space, yes, I can definitely see the arguments of you might be able to eliminate criminals utilizing the Bitcoin depots, but additionally, a lot of people in this space they utilize crypto so that they don't have to interact with the government and they can't be tracked and recorded. And that's not necessarily just exclusive to criminals by any means. A lot of people in different foreign nations or have like watched things happen with currencies, have watched governments kind of seize currencies at times or freeze bank accounts or whatever the case. And so crypto was supposed to be the space where you didn't have to jump through the extra hurdles and loops and tie your name to every single transaction because you don't want people getting access to that. And now Bitcoin Depot is required to do that basically in order to fulfill their obligations to the jurisdictions and quit getting sued out of oblivion. So, naturally, a lot of people didn't like this, and this is definitely a thing that could have contributed to the decrease in revenue we saw for Bitcoin Depot. Additionally, making those extra hurdles could have also cut down on the fraud and the scamming and the theft that was happening, and that too could have decreased the numbers for revenue. So it's kind of a mixed bag in terms of how they would go from here, especially now that after we're seeing this bankruptcy and a lot of states are now being more publicly aware of what was going on with this, we're definitely going to see some major legislation changes and already have that Bitcoin Depot would have a very, very hard time operating as efficiently as it was. Now, I did want to touch on Chapter 11 bankruptcy because that is specifically the bankruptcy process they're going through. Basically, with public companies, you kind of have two different bankruptcy filings that they can kind of go for. And Chapter 11 doesn't make them liquidate everything and still gives them a chance to maybe, and I'm going to put the slightest maybe on this because it's kind of a long shot, especially in this instance, but to maybe survive the bankruptcy process. Names like Wolfspeed AI actually recently survived Chapter 11 bankruptcy, but I just want to put it out there because a lot of people will be speculating and might even be putting money into Bitcoin Depot in speculation of whether or not they survived the bankruptcy process. It's really long odds. Like traditionally, just as a whole, companies in Chapter 11, it's about a 10 to 15% chance. And specifically due to this case, because the thing that was killing Bitcoin Depot was fraud and being sued. And then definitely when the legislation around the space changed as well, with some states just being like, yeah, no, we're not going to allow transactions. Those are all factors that make me consider this being significantly below that 10 to 15% success outcome. Now, I did look through their financial statements and it's not horrible by any means, but unless we see a major pivot in business model, this definitely is probably the end of Bitcoin Depot. Again, that's not going to stop people from pouring money into it. I mean, again, going back to the Wolf Speed AI, when companies do survive this Chapter 11 bankruptcy, their stock is rewarded immensely. And especially in the case of Wolf Speed, it's beyond probably what it should be right now. And that could be a sentiment to the exuberant market or whatnot. But personally, I will err on the side of caution to not go pour money into Bitcoin Depot on the speculation they might survive this, because quite frankly, I don't think they will. So yeah, really I just wanted to kind of come and yap, because if you've ever been in a mall, or if you've ever been in a grocery store or wherever, you've probably seen one of these things. I mean, they're even at like my mall near where I live, which is kind of like a smaller town. So it's like, oh heck, I didn't know we would get a Bitcoin Depot. And I never saw anyone using it. That was probably a good sign. I'm sure, like, if you're in the loop, I mean, I wouldn't want to lose 15% of my money each time I tried to make a cryptocurrency like transaction. That doesn't seem like a responsible thing to do with your money. But nevertheless, I still saw them, and I thought it was interesting to see that that company is now being taken out for fraud, and it's kind of going to probably old Yeller the company. So, yeah. Other than that, I hope you guys have a fantastic day. Thank you so much for checking out my video. I really just wanted to yap about this, so that's about it. Thank you.